The aluminum foil caught the fluorescent lights of the Millfield Community Center as Sofia carefully placed her dish on the competition table. At 12 years old, she was the youngest contestant in the annual Millfield Culinary Classic, but her small hands moved with the confidence of someone who had spent countless hours in the kitchen. She smoothed down her second-hand dress, the nicest one she owned, and glanced up at me with those determined brown eyes that reminded me so much of her grandmother. "It's perfect, Mom," she whispered, adjusting the small handwritten card that read Sofia Martinez, Abuela's Chicken Mole Poblano. I squeezed her shoulder. "She would be so proud of you, Mia." The truth was, I couldn't afford the fancy serving dishes that adorned the other entries. Sofia's creation sat in my mother's decades-old baking dish, carefully wrapped in foil to keep it warm. The rich aroma of chocolate, chilies, and spices escaped in tendrils of steam from beneath the silver covering, a recipe passed down through 4 generations of our family. "Well, well, how rustic." The voice came from behind us, dripping with the kind of sweetness that masked contempt. I didn't need to turn around to know it was Victoria Hargrove. She was the head of the Millfield Parents Association, the Historical Society, and seemingly every committee that mattered in our small town. Her daughter Brittany stood beside her in a pressed white chef's coat that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "Is that aluminum foil?" Brittany's voice carried across the room as she stifled a laugh behind manicured fingers. "I thought this was a culinary competition, not a church potluck." Sofia's cheeks flushed, but she held her ground. "It's traditional," she said quietly. "My abuela always served it this way." Victoria peered down at our entry through narrowed eyes. "How quaint. Good luck with that." She guided Brittany to her station where an elaborate 3-tiered presentation stood, garnished with edible flowers and accompanied by a professionally printed placard detailing the fusion techniques used in her deconstructed coq au vin with saffron foam. The judges began their rounds shortly after. There were 3 of them: the owner of the upscale restaurant on Main Street, the food columnist for the local paper, and the high school culinary arts teacher. All were fixtures at Victoria's legendary dinner parties. I watched as they spent nearly 15 minutes at Brittany's station, exclaiming over her technique and presentation. When they finally made their way to Sofia's dish, the newspaper columnist unwrapped the foil with 2 fingers as if touching something distasteful. "Mole," Sofia explained eagerly. "The recipe has been in our family for—" the restaurant owner interrupted, barely taking a bite before setting his fork down. "Very ethnic." The culinary teacher didn't even taste it, simply nodding and making a brief note before they moved on. The entire evaluation took less than 2 minutes. Sofia's face fell, but she forced a smile. "They didn't even try it properly," she whispered. "I know, honey," I said, my hand on her back. "But we know how good it is." An hour later, we stood in the crowd as the winners were announced. 3rd place went to an elaborate tiramisu. 2nd to a sous vide salmon. When Brittany's name was called for 1st place, Victoria's applause was the loudest in the room. As Brittany accepted her trophy, a golden chef's hat mounted on marble, Victoria caught my eye across the room and smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had never expected any other outcome. The crowd began to disperse, and I overheard a group of contestants gathering near Brittany. "Did you see that foil dish?" one of them snickered. "Total peasant food," another replied. "My housekeeper makes something like that," Brittany added loudly, twirling her trophy. Their laughter echoed across the room. Sofia stood frozen beside me, her eyes fixed on the floor, hands gripping the edges of her now covered dish. I watched as a single tear slid down her cheek, falling silently onto the crinkled foil. In that moment, something inside me hardened. This wasn't just about a cooking competition. This was about a group of privileged people teaching my daughter that her heritage, our traditions, our very identity was something to be mocked and dismissed. "Come on, Sofia," I said gently, taking the dish from her trembling hands. "Let's go home." As we walked out the door, I heard Victoria's voice rise above the chatter. "Some people simply don't understand what quality cuisine is." Sofia didn't speak a word during the drive home. And when we arrived, she took off her dress, hung it carefully in the closet, and placed her grandmother's apron, the one she wore every time she cooked, in the back of her drawer. "I don't want to cook anymore, Mom," she said quietly before closing her bedroom door. I stood in our small kitchen, still holding the dish that contained generations of love and tradition, and felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time: rage. 3 days after the competition, I found myself restocking shelves at Millfield Market, where I worked as assistant manager. The bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see Lucia Ramirez, the high school culinary arts teacher and one of the competition judges. Our eyes met briefly before she looked away, busying herself with examining apples she clearly didn't intend to purchase. I continued my work, pretending not to notice her hovering nearby. Finally she approached, clutching her purse like a shield. "Miss Martinez," she said quietly, glancing over her shoulder. "I wanted to tell you your daughter's dish was extraordinary." I paused, a can of tomato sauce suspended midair. "That's not the impression you gave at the competition." Lucia's eyes darted around the empty store. "I know, I'm sorry." She lowered her voice even further. "That mole, it reminded me of my grandmother's cooking. The complexity, the balance. Sofia has a gift, then why Victoria Hargrove chairs the education foundation that funds my culinary program," she interrupted, her words tumbling out in a rush. 2 days before the competition, she made it very clear that her daughter needed to win for her college applications. She reminded me that the foundation's annual budget review is next month. The can in my hand suddenly felt heavy. "You're telling me the competition was rigged?" Lucia's silence was answer enough. "And the other judges? Robert owes his restaurant license approval to Victoria's husband's position on the city council. And Carolyn from the newspaper," she shrugged helplessly. "The Hargroves are the paper's biggest advertisers." My chest tightened with a mixture of vindication and fury. "Does everyone in this town bow to the Hargroves? You don't understand. They've built their reputation on excellence and taste. Anyone who challenges that finds themselves." She trailed off, looking at her shoes. "Finds themselves what? Isolated. Pushed out." Lucia's voice hardened. "Last year the Martinez family, no relation to you, I think, had their landscaping business. Their son beat Brittany in the science fair. Suddenly the Hargroves claimed their work was substandard. Within months they lost half their clients and had to move to the next county." The pieces clicked into place. Why certain families disappeared from town events, why some businesses thrived while others mysteriously failed. It wasn't just about a cooking competition. It was about power, about keeping people like us in our place. "Sofia won't even look at a stove since the competition," I said, more to myself than to Lucia. "She had such a gift." Lucia reached into her purse and pressed a business card into my hand. "This is probably too little too late, but when Sofia is ready to cook again, call me. I have connections at the Culinary Institute in the city." After she left, I stood motionless in the canned goods aisle, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. At home that evening I watched Sofia push her dinner around her plate, her eyes vacant. My vibrant, passionate daughter had been replaced by a quiet shadow who flinched at the mention of cooking. That night, while Sofia slept, I pulled out the small box where I kept my mother's recipes. Between the yellowed cards, I found the photograph, my mother standing proudly next to a young man in chef whites. She had worked as a housekeeper for a wealthy family whose son she had taught to cook our family recipes. On the back, in her handwriting, "Me and Marco before he became famous. He never forgot where he came from." I traced my finger over my mother's smile, something cold and determined settling in my chest. The Hargroves thought they could crush my daughter's spirit, erase our heritage, and face no consequences. They believed their money and influence made them untouchable. They were wrong. The magazine trembled in my hands as I stared at the headline. "Celebrity Chef Marco Alvarez returns to roots with Midwest charity tour." There he was, the skinny boy from my mother's photo transformed into a distinguished man with salt and pepper hair and the confident stance of someone who had conquered the culinary world. According to the article, he would be visiting several small towns to raise money for culinary scholarships, including a stop in Clayton County next month. Clayton County, just 30 minutes from Millfield. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years and drove to the public library, 2 towns over where no one would recognize me. There I researched everything I could find about Chef Alvarez. His rise from humble beginnings, his 3 Michelin stars, his popular television show where he celebrated authentic, traditional cooking, his foundation that provided opportunities for underprivileged youth interested in culinary careers, and most importantly, his well-documented gratitude toward my mother Elena Martinez, the housekeeper who had recognized his talent and taught him her family recipes when he was just a kitchen helper for the wealthy family where she worked. By afternoon, I had a plan forming. By evening, I had the beginnings of a strategy. And by midnight, as I sat at our kitchen table surrounded by notes and printouts, I had something the Hargroves would never expect: hope. The next morning, I made a call to my cousin Teresa, who worked as a secretary at the Clayton County Events Center. "You need Chef Alvarez's contact information. Elaine, you can't be serious. Please, Teresa, it's important." Her sigh crackled through the phone. "His manager handles everything. But I did hear something. The chef specifically requested local catering for the VIP reception. He wants to feature home cooks from the area, especially those with traditional family recipes." She paused. "The catering coordinator is a friend of mine. I could put in a word." 2 days later, I received an email confirming that I had been selected to contribute to the catering for Chef Alvarez's VIP reception. My hands shook as I read the details. The event would host 100 regional influencers, business leaders, and donors, exactly the circles in which the Hargroves moved. Now came the difficult part. "Sofia," I said that evening as she did her homework at the kitchen table, "I need your help with something." She looked up, dark circles under her eyes that no 12-year-old should have. "What is it?" "I've been asked to cater an event and I was thinking we could make abuela's mole." Her pencil stopped moving. "I don't cook anymore, Mom." "I know," I said softly. "But this is different. This is just for us, not for judges or competitions." "What's the point?" The defeat in her voice broke my heart. "No one appreciates real food anyway." I took a deep breath. "Chef Marco Alvarez will be there." Her eyes widened slightly, the first spark of interest I'd seen in weeks. Like many aspiring young chefs, she'd watched his shows, read about his journey. "Abuela taught him to cook, you know," I said, pulling out the old photograph. "Before he was famous." Sofia studied the picture, running her finger over our grandmother's face. "Really? Really?" He credits her with inspiring his love of authentic cooking. I paused. "I think she would want him to taste your version of her mole." For several long moments, Sofia said nothing. Then, barely audible, "The Hargroves will probably be there." "Probably," I admitted. "But they won't know it's your dish. We'll keep that our secret until the right moment." A week later, I submitted our catering plan, carefully omitting Sofia's name from the documentation. Instead, I listed myself as preparing Elena Martinez's traditional mole poblano, a family recipe with historical significance to Chef Alvarez. Meanwhile, I contacted everyone I knew with connections to the event. My former classmate, who now worked in local media, promised to ensure the Hargroves received an invitation. My neighbor who cleaned Victoria's house confirmed they had marked the reception on their calendar. Victoria wouldn't miss an opportunity to network with regional elite. The final piece fell into place when Teresa called with news that seemed too good to be true. "Elaine, Chef Alvarez specifically asked about Elena Martinez when he saw the catering menu. He wants to meet whoever is preparing her recipe." I smiled as I hung up the phone. The stage was set, the players were in position. In 3 weeks, the Hargroves would learn that some dishes and some people should never be dismissed. That night, I heard something I hadn't heard in weeks. The sound of Sofia in the kitchen, testing spices, mumbling measurements to herself. I watched from the doorway as she adjusted the heat under a small pot, her face intent with concentration. "I need to get it exactly right," she said without looking up. "For Abuela, and for herself," I thought. Whether she realized it or not, Sofia was reclaiming something that had been taken from her. I let her work, feeling a complex mixture of emotions: satisfaction at my plan coming together, concern about using my daughter in my scheme for justice, but ultimately, hope that this would heal what had been broken in her. The Hargroves had taken something precious from my child. Now they would witness its resurrection in the most public way possible. The Clayton County Events Center had been transformed for the evening. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white-clothed tables. Flower arrangements perfumed the air. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Through the kitchen swinging doors, I watched the region's elite arrive in their finest attire, air-kissing and trading business cards. Sofia stood beside me in the catering kitchen, her small hands steady as she made final adjustments to our dish. We had prepared it exactly as her grandmother had taught us, rich with chocolate, chilies, and the secret blend of spices that had been passed down through generations. Once again, it rested in my mother's old baking dish, covered in foil, the humblest-looking offering among the elaborate catering spread. "Remember the plan," I whispered, smoothing Sofia's hair. "We're just caterers tonight. No one needs to know you're the chef until the right moment." She nodded solemnly, her eyes wide with a mixture of anxiety and determination. "What if he doesn't like it?" "He will," I assured her, though my own heart raced with uncertainty. What if my plan failed? What if I was subjecting Sofia to another humiliation? No. I pushed the doubts away. This time would be different. We carried our dish out during the final catering setup, placing it at the end of the long buffet table without fanfare. The event coordinator raised an eyebrow at the foil-covered dish but said nothing as I placed a small card beside it. Traditional mole poblano, Elena Martinez family recipe. As guests began to filter into the main hall, I spotted them immediately. Victoria Hargrove in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her husband Richard in a tailored suit, and Brittany walking between them, her chin tilted upward with practiced poise. They carried a covered silver tray, which Victoria handed ceremoniously to the event coordinator. For the chef's table, I overheard her saying, "The winning dish from the Millfield Culinary Classic. We thought Chef Alvarez might appreciate experiencing the exceptional culinary talent our community is fostering." The coordinator nodded, placing Brittany's dish at the center of a special table set up near the podium. Sofia and I retreated to our stations, dressed in the standard black and white catering uniforms that rendered us nearly invisible to the guests. From my position serving wine, I could see Victoria working the room, strategically dropping her daughter's name into conversations while gesturing toward the special display. "That's the one," I heard her tell a group of business owners. "My Brittany is quite the prodigy." Her deconstructed coq au vin impressed all the judges. Sofia, stationed near the dessert table, caught my eye across the room. I gave her a reassuring nod. The event began with speeches from local dignitaries about the importance of supporting culinary arts education. I barely heard them, watching the door for the guest of honor. According to the schedule, Chef Alvarez would arrive halfway through the reception, say a few words, and then mingle with donors. At precisely 8:30, a ripple of excitement moved through the crowd. The side door opened, and there he was, Chef Marco Alvarez, more imposing in person than on television, his presence commanding immediate attention. The room erupted in applause as he made his way to the podium. "Thank you for supporting our Culinary Scholarship Foundation," he began, his accent still noticeable despite decades in America. "I believe that great food comes not from expensive ingredients or fancy techniques, but from heart, from tradition, from the hands of those who cook with love." His words sent a jolt of validation through me. This was why I had chosen this path for our retribution, not just because of his fame or influence, but because he understood what cooking meant to families like ours. After his brief speech, the networking resumed with increased energy, everyone angling for a moment with the celebrity chef. Victoria wasted no time, practically dragging Brittany toward him. "Chef Alvarez," she called, her voice carrying across the room. "You simply must meet my daughter. She's our local culinary champion." I watched as Victoria led the chef to the special table where Brittany's dish was displayed. The chef smiled politely as Victoria explained the complex fusion techniques her daughter had employed. This was the moment we had been waiting for. I caught Sofia's eye and gave the signal we had agreed upon, a small nod. She slipped away from her station and back into the kitchen while I made my move. Weaving through the crowd, I approached just as Chef Alvarez was sampling Brittany's creation. "Chef," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Elaine Martinez. My mother was Elena Martinez." His eyes widened with recognition. "Elena's daughter, Dios mío. Your mother was my first teacher in the kitchen." He clasped my hand warmly between both of his. Victoria's smile froze as she tried to determine who this caterer was and why the chef was embracing her. "It's an honor to meet you," I continued. "My mother always spoke so fondly of you. In fact, we've prepared her mole poblano recipe for tonight's event. It would mean so much if you would try it." The chef's face lit up. Elena's mole, I haven't tasted that in 20 years. Where is it? With a steady hand, I gestured toward our humble foil-wrapped dish at the end of the buffet. Victoria's eyes followed my gesture, her expression souring as she recognized what I was pointing to. That, she said, unable to hide her disdain. The foil-wrapped thing. Chef Alvarez was already moving toward it, leaving Victoria and Brittany behind. I followed, heart pounding against my ribs. This was the moment everything hinged on. The moment that would either vindicate Sofia or subject her to further humiliation. The chef paused at our dish, his fingers hovering over the foil covering. May I? Please, I said, and watched as he unwrapped it with the reverence of someone opening a precious gift. The rich aroma of mole poblano filled the air as Chef Alvarez lifted the foil. Steam rose from the dark, complex sauce covering tender chicken, the surface glistening with the sheen that comes only from patient, proper preparation. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. This smell, he murmured. It takes me back 30 years. A small crowd had begun to gather, curious about what had captured the celebrity chef's attention. Victoria and Brittany hovered at the edge, Victoria's expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance at the attention being diverted from her daughter. Chef Alvarez took a small spoon and tasted the mole. The moment the sauce touched his tongue, his eyes widened. He paused, then took another spoonful, this time closing his eyes as he savored it. When he opened them again, they were glistening with emotion. Dios mío, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. This is Elena's mole, exactly as I remember it. He turned to me, gesturing with the spoon. The balance of the chocolate and chilies, the hint of cinnamon, the way the sauce clings to the chicken. This is not just cooking, this is heritage. More guests crowded around, smartphones appearing to capture the moment. The event coordinator rushed over, sensing a publicity opportunity. Victoria's smile had completely vanished now, replaced by a tight-lipped grimace as she watched her carefully orchestrated showcase derailed. Who made this? Chef Alvarez demanded, looking at me. You said it was your mother's recipe, but Elena had a special technique for toasting the chilies that few could replicate. Whoever made this has her touch. Before I could answer, Richard Hargrove stepped forward, clearing his throat. Chef, while this home-style dish seems to have caught your attention, we really should introduce you to our daughter's award-winning creation. He gestured toward the special table with Brittany's dish. She won the Millfield Culinary Classic last month. Her technique is quite sophisticated. Chef Alvarez barely glanced in their direction. I want to meet the chef who prepared this mole, he insisted. Victoria's social instincts kicked in as she realized she was losing control of the situation. She laughed, a brittle sound, and touched the chef's arm. Marco, may I call you Marco? I think there's been a misunderstanding. The dish you're praising isn't part of the official catering, it's just something one of the staff brought. She waved dismissively toward me. The real culinary talent is over here. Chef Alvarez gently but firmly removed Victoria's hand from his arm. Senora, in my experience, real culinary talent often comes from unexpected places. He turned back to me, his expression intense. Please, I must meet whoever prepared this dish. The crowd had grown larger now. I could see the event photographer capturing the moment, local business leaders watching with interest, and several of Victoria's social circle exchanging confused glances. My daughter made it, I said, my voice clear and steady. She learned from me, and I learned from my mother, Elena. A murmur went through the crowd. Victoria's face flushed deep red. Your daughter? Chef Alvarez asked. How old is she? 12. He shook his head in amazement. 12 years old, and she can create this. He depth the flavor, the balance. Professionals train for years to achieve this level of nuance. He looked around the room. Where is she? I must meet her. Victoria stepped between us, desperation edging into her voice. Chef Alvarez, you really must try Brittany's dish. She's won awards, she's been accepted into the junior program at the Culinary Institute. Her technique with the sous vide. Excuse me, Chef Alvarez said firmly, stepping around her. I'm more interested in the chef who made this mole. As if on cue, the kitchen doors swung open, and Sofia emerged, still in her catering uniform. Our eyes met across the room, hers questioning, mine encouraging. She walked slowly toward us, her small shoulders squared despite her obvious nervousness. The Hargroves watched in disbelief as Chef Alvarez's face lit up at the sight of the young girl approaching. Brittany looked between her parents, confusion giving way to dawning recognition as she spotted Sofia. "That's the girl from the competition," she hissed to her mother. "The one with the peasant food." Victoria's eyes narrowed as she finally made the connection. Her gaze darted from Sofia to me and back again, realizing too late that she had walked into a situation she couldn't control. As Sofia reached us, Chef Alvarez knelt down to her level, offering his hand with the same respect he would show to any colleague. "You made this mole?" he asked her gently. Sofia nodded, her voice small but clear. "It's my abuela's recipe. She taught my mom and my mom taught me." Chef Alvarez smiled, a warm, genuine expression that transformed his famous face. "Well, your abuela would be very proud. This is the best mole I've tasted since I left her kitchen 30 years ago." Behind us, Victoria cleared her throat loudly. "I'm sure it's very authentic," she said, injecting the word with the same tone one might use for primitive. "But Brittany's dish represents contemporary culinary innovation." Chef Alvarez rose to his full height and turned to face the Hargroves, his expression now cool and professional. "Innovation without foundation is just novelty, Señora. This young chef understands something many trained professionals never grasp, that true cooking begins with respect for tradition." The assembled crowd nodded approvingly. I caught sight of several influential people in the room watching the Hargroves with new, evaluating eyes. Chef Alvarez turned back to Sofia's dish, gesturing for her to join him. "You see this?" he said, pointing to the way the sauce had developed a slight sheen on top. "Your abuela taught me that if you don't skim the chili skins properly before blending, the sauce becomes bitter. And this," he indicated the texture with his spoon, "this comes from hand grinding the ingredients in a molcajete instead of using a food processor." "Yes?" Sofia nodded, a small smile beginning to form at the corners of her mouth. "Abuela said machines make things faster but not better." "Exactly." Chef Alvarez laughed, delighted. "And the chocolate, you bloomed it slowly in oil before adding it to the sauce." "Yes sir," Sofia replied. "And I used 3 types of dried chilies, like she taught us. Ancho for sweetness, guajillo for color, and chipotle for smoke." The chef's eyes widened. 3 chilies in that exact combination, that was Elena's signature. "No one else does it precisely that way." He looked at me, then back at Sofia. "This is Elena Martinez's granddaughter." I stepped forward, placing my hands on Sofia's shoulders. "Yes, this is Sofia Martinez. My mother was Elena, your first cooking teacher." A flash of recognition crossed the chef's face. "I remember now, Elena showed me a picture of her baby granddaughter just before I left for culinary school." His voice softened with emotion. "She said, 'This little one already watches me in the kitchen, like she understands the magic.'" Sofia's eyes glistened at this connection to the grandmother she barely remembered. The crowd had grown silent, captivated by the unfolding story. Even the string quartet had stopped playing, the musicians watching with interest. Victoria Hargrove tried one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Well, isn't this charming?" she said with a tight smile. "A little family reunion." "However, Chef Alvarez, the fundraiser schedule can wait," he finished firmly. "This is why I do what I do, to honor teachers like Elena, who preserve culinary traditions." He turned to address the crowd. "This young chef has demonstrated remarkable skill in a dish that many professionals cannot master. The balance of flavors, the technique, this is what my foundation aims to support: authentic talent, regardless of background." He placed a hand on Sofia's shoulder. "Young lady, my restaurant in Chicago has a special apprenticeship program for gifted young chefs. We teach them both traditional and modern techniques, helping them develop their skills while finishing their education. I would be honored if you would consider joining us next summer." A collective gasp went through the room. Brittany's mouth fell open in shock. Richard Hargrove's face reddened as he stared at his expensive shoes. Victoria looked as though she had swallowed something sour. Sofia looked up at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. I nodded encouragingly, my heart so full I could barely speak. I would love that, Sofia stammered. Thank you, Chef. Chef Alvarez beamed. The honor is mine. Your grandmother would be so proud to see her legacy continuing. From the edge of the crowd, a voice spoke up. She deserves it. Heads turned to see Sofia Ramirez, the culinary arts teacher and competition judge, stepping forward. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. Sofia's dish at the Millfield Culinary Classic was extraordinary. It should have won. She looked directly at Victoria. I was pressured to vote against her. A hushed murmur rippled through the crowd. Victoria's face drained of color. What are you saying? Chef Alvarez asked, his expression darkening. Lucia straightened her shoulders. I'm saying that Sofia's cooking was judged unfairly, that her dish was dismissed because of who she was, not because of its quality. She turned to Sofia. I'm sorry, what happened at that competition was wrong. Victoria stepped forward, her voice a harsh whisper. Lucia, remember your program funding. Is that a threat, Mrs. Hargrove? Chef Alvarez interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. Are you suggesting this educator's professional judgment was compromised for financial reasons? The crowd's murmuring grew louder. I spotted several board members of the Education Foundation exchanging concerned glances. Victoria faltered, suddenly aware of the many influential eyes on her. Of course not. I merely, Mom, you said the judges were your friends, Brittany blurted out. You said they would make sure I won because colleges look at competitions like that. The room fell completely silent. Victoria's face drained of what little color remained. Chef Alvarez looked between the Hargroves and Sofia, understanding dawning in his eyes. So a talented young chef was denied recognition because of influence. He shook his head in disgust. This is exactly what my foundation fights against. The idea that culinary excellence belongs only to those with money or connections. He turned to the crowd, many of whom were prominent donors and community leaders. This is why I started my scholarship program. Talent can come from anywhere, from the child of a housekeeper, like me, or from a young girl whose family serves their masterpiece in foil because they cannot afford fancy presentation platters. He gestured to Sofia. This is what real cooking looks like. Not pretension, not privilege, passion and heritage and heart. The crowd erupted in applause. Sofia stood straighter, a transformation coming over her as she watched people celebrating not just her cooking, but her tradition, her family's legacy. Chef Alvarez raised his hand for silence. In addition to offering Sofia an apprenticeship, I would like to announce that the first recipient of tonight's culinary scholarship will be, he paused, his eyes twinkling, Sofia Martinez of Millfield. The applause redoubled. Someone started chanting Sofia's name. Phones flashed as people captured the moment. Through it all, I watched the Hargroves retreat toward the exit, Victoria's designer heels clicking rapidly across the polished floor, her family following in her wake. For once no one was watching them leave. The Millfield Gazette ran the story on the front page. Local girl's family recipe impresses celebrity chef. The photograph showed Sofia standing proudly next to Chef Alvarez, her grandmother's foil-wrapped dish between them. The article detailed the scholarship, the apprenticeship, and in carefully worded paragraphs, the concerns raised about the integrity of local cooking competitions. Within a week, the ripple effects were impossible to ignore. Victoria Hargrove resigned from the Parents Association and the Historical Society, citing personal reasons. Richard's usual seat at the head of the Chamber of Commerce table remained conspicuously empty. Brittany transferred to a private school in the next county. But the changes went beyond the Hargroves. The Millfield Culinary Classic announced a complete reorganization, with a new committee featuring professionally certified judges from outside the community. Sofia Ramirez was appointed head of a new transparency board that would oversee all youth competitions in the county. We want to ensure that talent, not connections, determines our winners, the new committee chair stated in a press release. 3 weeks after the fundraiser, Sofia received an official letter from Chef Alvarez's foundation. Inside was not only confirmation of her summer apprenticeship, but an invitation to join the Young Chefs Academy in Chicago, a prestigious weekend program for exceptional culinary talents. The foundation would cover all expenses. Mom, look, Sofia exclaimed, her eyes bright with excitement. Chef Alvarez says they've never accepted anyone under 14 before, but he's making an exception because my mole was technically perfect. I watched as she danced around our small kitchen, the letter clutched to her chest. The transformation was remarkable. The quiet, defeated girl who had put away her grandmother's apron was gone. In her place stood a confident young chef with dreams as big as her talent. That evening, Sofia insisted on cooking dinner, chicken enchiladas with her own twist on the traditional sauce. As she worked, she hummed softly, moving through the kitchen with a new assurance. She no longer measured ingredients. She felt them, the way her grandmother had. I'm thinking of entering the Spring Festival cooking competition, she announced as we ate. Not to prove anything to anyone, just because I love doing it. I think that's perfect, I told her. Later, after Sofia had gone to bed, I sat alone at our kitchen table, thinking about how events had unfolded. I had planned my revenge carefully, orchestrating each step with the Hargroves' humiliation in mind. But somewhere along the way, revenge had transformed into something else, something better. Justice hadn't come through confrontation or elaborate schemes, but simply by creating space for Sofia's talent to be recognized. The Hargroves had fallen not because I pushed them, but because their own actions couldn't stand in the light of truth. My mother had always told me that good food speaks for itself. It turns out so does integrity. 2 months later, I received a call from Teresa. You'll never believe this, she said. The Hargroves are moving. Richard got a job opportunity in another state. We both knew it for what it was, an escape from the whispers and changed glances that followed them around town. I felt no triumph at the news, just a quiet satisfaction that the natural order of things had been restored. What mattered wasn't that the Hargroves had been punished, but that Sofia had reclaimed her passion and confidence. That Sunday, we hosted a small dinner party, Lucia and her husband, Teresa and her family, and a few neighbors who had become friends. Sofia prepared most of the meal, proudly serving her creations on the new set of serving dishes Chef Alvarez had sent her. But when it came time for the main course, she brought out her grandmother's old baking dish, the food still wrapped in foil. Some traditions are worth keeping, she explained as she unwrapped it at the table, the rich aroma filling the room. This is how my abuela served it, and her mother before her. As my guests exclaimed over the dish, I thought about how close we had come to losing this, not just a recipe, but the heritage and confidence that came with it. How easily talent can be crushed when power is misused, and yet how resilient the human spirit can be when truth is given room to flourish. Sofia caught my eye across the table and smiled, the same determined smile she had given me before the competition, but now tempered with wisdom beyond her years. She had learned something no cooking class could teach, that her worth wasn't determined by others' judgments. The meal continued, filled with laughter and stories. The foil wrapping from Sofia's dish crumpled beside her grandmother's serving platter, a humble reminder that sometimes true excellence comes in the most unassuming packages.